Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus.
Greetings to all our listeners. My name is Lyne Sneige, and I'm the director of the Arts and Culture Center at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Today's podcast is coming out of an exciting project organized through a partnership between the Middle East Institute and the Thaqafiyya channel of the MBC Media Group in Saudi Arabia. We had the privilege to invite leading American authors to speak about their works for the first time ever this past fall at the Riyadh International Book Fair, one of the largest book fairs in the region. The authors were featured in the fair's rich program of talks and engaged with audiences in Saudi Arabia about their writing and vision. Their talks were later aired on MBC's Al Thaqafiyya channel, a cultural channel in partnership with Saudi's Ministry of Culture. The TV program is called Riyadh Talks, and our listeners can enjoy watching the talks on YouTube. The initiative was also part of the Middle East Institute's cultural diplomacy efforts to strengthen ties and mutual understanding between the people of the Middle East and the people of the United States through the arts. My guest today, Kwame Alexander, is a poet, educator, publisher, Emmy Award-winning producer, and the best-selling author of 40 books of young adult fiction, children's books, poetry, and memoir. He was one of 4 celebrated American authors who were invited to speak at the fair. They included best-selling novelist Jonathan Franzen, biographer Walter Isaacson, and journalist and author Fareed Zakaria. Welcome, Kwame.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm so delighted to be speaking to you today about your experience in Saudi Arabia as a speaker at the Riyadh International Book Fair and as a first-time visitor to the country. And of course, I'm curious to know how this experience might have shaped your views about Saudi, about cross-cultural engagement, and of course, about writing. So maybe I'll start with the Instagram content you posted when wrapping up your trip to Saudi. What were the impressions of the trip that you shared with your followers, and what did you find most impactful and valuable about your trip?
Wow. So you're expecting me to remember that Instagram post. I will tell you this, that I arrived in Saudi a little bit overwhelmed and unsure, uncertain. You're in a new place, a new country, a new culture, and certainly the language barriers, the cultural differences. I didn't know what to expect, but I'm always open. I am a say yes person. I love sort of walking through doors, even if I don't know what's on the other side, and, figuring it out once I got there. And I got to tell you, I felt welcomed. As an American, I felt welcomed. As an artist, I felt, a sense of community. One of the first things that happened when I arrived, I remember one of our hosts who's affiliated with the event, he brought his son and his son's friend to meet me. And they were excited to meet me because they had read one of my books. And they wanted me to autograph their book and take pictures. And this is something I'm used to in America. It happens a lot when I travel. But to come to Saudi and for it to happen there it made me feel like, okay, I got this. This is not that much different. And what it said to me is that words, literature, books can really bring us together. They can really forge a sense of community. And that was one of the biggest things I got from that trip, is that our worlds are very different, but there are connections. And if we can figure out what those connections are, books can help us get there, then we can have a sense of community that allows us to really appreciate each other in a really profound way.
Yeah, that is lovely. And that, I want to take you back to that trip in the fall of 2024. Your experience in Saudi, Kwame, went beyond the book fair. Your personalized program included visits to the arts district, to artist studios, to conversation with young Saudi writers. If you can remember, what were your impressions of those encounters and conversation with the creative community in Saudi Arabia, where did you feel that those people had their finger on what pulse? Could you, in your own words, share with us your views of that experience going to a new country that is investing so much in culture and having those conversations with those artists and writers and who were really thinking about the future of their country?
Any culture, any country, any community that is interested in becoming a better place or in becoming a place that encourages freedom of thought and expression, any place that is looking to create children who have imaginations that are going to help them imagine sort of a better world must rely on its culture to inspire and inform that. And so if you have a place that is lacking in sort of the cultural exploration, then you have a country that is lacking in identity. And what I found in Saudi is that not only is there a burgeoning cultural landscape, but in many ways it felt illuminating and brilliant and genius in a way that I would have never expected because of all of the stereotypes that the West has of the Middle East. And so one particular interaction I had with the artist Ahmed,
Ahmed Mater, correct.
I mean, when he showed me what, some of the projects he'd been working on, and I got to sit down and look through the pages of the books dedicated to his work that he's written, was floored. I felt empowered, like, yeah, like artists are, there's a Latin word called ekphrasis, and it's when an artist responds to another piece of art through his or her art. And I remember visiting Ahmed Mater's studio and feeling like I wanted to go back to my hotel and write some poetry because he had inspired me. And I feel like the art, the culture, the literature, these are tools that can bring us together, that can show us how similar we are. I was really just encouraged by what I got to encounter in terms of the arts. And then, I know we're going to talk about my speech, but walking around that convention floor and seeing all of these books, these publishers and booksellers and readers, there were a lot of people there. And anytime you have a lot of people like that gathered for the purposes of celebrating literature, I feel like you're on the right path to being able to imagine, being able to dream up a world. And I'm all about dreaming a world that recognizes and appreciates and offers, freedom of identity, of expression, of hope, of humanity.
So let's go back to the Riyadh International Book Fair, to your talk at the Riyadh. You shared with the book fair audience your love of writing, of words, of poetry, and you drew a lot of parallels with the local culture you had so briefly experienced, and that was so powerful. And I remember ignited the room with energy. Talk to us a little bit about that, and maybe share some memorable moments from your interaction with that audience.
It wasn't very hard to summon the, creative inspiration in that room because, number one, I had come to Saudi with my own sort of perceptions about, in particular, the way women are treated. And when I looked out in that audience and saw mostly women who were there to hear me talk about the power of literature and how it can transform us, I was galvanized. I was like, yes. So that misperception, I nixed it in that moment because certainly if I was going to give a talk about how important words are and how they can free us and how they can allow us to express ourselves and how they can allow us to build confidence and give us a voice, and there were women in the audience, I found that beautiful. and quite the opposite of what I'd been told. So that was encouraging. And then the other thing that sort of took hold of me was that I was in the Middle East, which is known for some of the most profound, legendary, iconic, beautiful poetry. When we think of Khalil Gibran and we think of Rumi, I mean, these are poets that we, in America study and love and quote. And here I was right in the middle of it. And so I tried to remember that and sort of feel that energy and give that back to the room. I tried to be in the tradition of that, you know, what that meant. And so once I sort of had those two moments, I felt right at home in terms of being able to tell my story and share it. And that is, the power of poetry and how it can transform our lives.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about how you talk about poetry as giving a voice, right? And your writing is aimed at young people, mixing poetry, sports, and teenage life in the US, and is meant to give youth a voice and have them experience poetry in a new, approachable way. And Saudi is a very young society. And young people are clearly, as you've experienced, hungry to tell their stories. What is your message to them, and how do you think writing will empower them?
Well, whether you have sort of little things that you're trying to overcome or deal with in your life, like homework, or whether you have bigger, sort of heavier, weightier things that are happening in your life that you have to deal with, like death. Poetry distills the entire human heart. It takes these things and it allows you to be able to process them. It's almost as if poetry is akin to prayer. It's a way of us talking to ourselves and to each other in a way that hits us immediately in the heart. It's not a telling thing, it's a showing thing. It's a making us feel something thing. And whenever you sort of feel something, that can allow you to think something. And that thought can allow you to do something. And so I believe that poetry has that power to trigger that kind of voice where we are able to express ourselves in a way that's emotional and meaningful and significant, which allows us to then act on that. And perhaps if we're doing it right, our writings can inspire other people to feel and think and do. And so I think, young writers in particular, but young people in Saudi in general, they need to find their voice. And one of the best ways to do that is through writing, is through putting their thoughts down on paper and being able to articulate and show us what they're thinking and how they're feeling. And I think that's quite impactful because also if people are listening or reading or looking at your painting or listening to your music, then that means that what you're saying is resonating with other people, that you're sharing it with other people and they're responding to it. And that's a whole nother level of joy for the artist.
Absolutely. I remember one of the very powerful sort of closing messages that you had for them, looking at this, wide audience of almost 300 people in this room. And you said, don't let anyone tell your story. You need to tell your story.
The thing is, if you do not tell your story, it will get told and it will be told by someone else. And it's going to be told from their point of view, from their vantage point, from their perspective. And that may not always be the best thing. It may not always be a good thing. And so the way to sort of combat that is to tell your own story and to ensure that your family, your ancestors, your experiences, your ideas, your ideals are communicated in a way that is meaningful, respectful, significant, authentic, and ultimately truthful. You've got to tell it.
Absolutely. And just zooming out a little bit on the role of book fairs, what kind of impact do you think international book fairs like the Riyadh International Book Fair have on sort of global literacy and this cultural exchange that you just talked about, and why you think this is important?
Yeah, well, you can determine the climate of a culture by the way it treats its writers and its appreciation of books. And to host an international book fair like the Riyadh Book Fair, it speaks to that and it says, we are serious about literature and literacy. And it says that not only to its people, but it says it to the world. Again, it begins to put the country, put the area in a conversation that's taking place globally on the power of literature. And again, I can say this over and over, but I'm a strong believer that, the climate of a place can be dictated and determined by how well it treats its writers and how well it promotes its literature. And I guess the other part of it is we talked about telling your story and individuals telling your story. Well, Saudi has to tell its story, right? The Middle East has to tell its story. And the way to do that is by creating a community of writers and publishers and booksellers and people who traffic in this business of spreading and sharing the words and offering them an opportunity to tell that story. And I think the Riyadh International Book Fair is a testament to the fact that that story is getting told in a really big way.
That trip was so short, but so rich as well,
Yeah.
right?
With
And
great food, by the way.
absolutely. And food is such an important part of this society and this culture, right? Because it is a way to share and to sit down and to share the generosity and the richness and the flavors and so much happens over food and over shared meals. And we've had some wonderful ones as well in Saudi. But as you came back to the US and you zoomed out, how did this trip and experience perhaps impact your thinking or change you? What kind of ideas or thoughts did that trigger for you on the importance perhaps of those sort of exchanges and what can come out of them?
That we are more alike than we are dissimilar, that we all eat, we all laugh, we all have family, we all love, we all read. We do all of these things. We may, do them slightly differently,
Hmm.
but the truth is that we are, and it sounds cliche to say, but, I came back having an appreciation for the humanity of a people that I hadn't known in that way before. I had not ever been to Saudi. Books are mirrors and windows. And for me being at the Riyadh International Book Fair and seeing all these young people and all these readers buying books and reading and engaged in conversations around literature, how important it was that these people had books that were mirrors where they could see themselves and see their experiences and see what was possible through these stories. And for me, the books were windows where I could see other people who I hadn't known as a way for me to be more connected as a global citizen, as a human being. And I found that really awesome and profound. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's what I
Oh,
was thinking.
absolutely. And you answered it so poetically and so beautifully. And that is almost a perfect note and time to sort of, I'm mindful of your time with us, Kwame, and want to wrap this podcast. And I don't think there's a more perfect way to wrap it with what you've just shared and said about your experience It has been such a pleasure and an honor to host you today, Kwame. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights with me. It's been a privilege to be in conversation with you here on Middle East in Focus. Thank you so much. For our listeners, please follow us on social media Insta account and our Twitter handle at MEI Arts Culture for more inspiring projects and announcements of future programs.